This week on Dan Really Likes Wine, we go beyond South Africa's borders to two countries who are collaborating with South Africa to make some rather special wine. One of those countries is Chile and the Longavi range, one of Chile's top winemakers collaborating with one of South Africa's top winemakers. The other country is Greece, a Greek family who've settled in the Stellenbosch Hills area and are making their own range under the Onoma label. But we start with the first of the Chilean wines, and from Longavi it is a Sauvignon Blanc. Julio Bouchon is the Chilean in question. He's from French heritage, French winemaking heritage, but he's in Chile and he has teamed up with somebody whose work we've seen on Dan Really Likes Wine a number of occasions. David Niewoudt, who's the man behind Cederberg, who've been having a great deal of success in recent times with the wine that they're making, both up in Cederberg and with the Ghost Corner range. This is a Sauvignon Blanc that is produced entirely in Chile. The grapes are there, the wine's made, it's the expertise that's shared. So it's some South African know-how filtered in to some Chilean expertise with a touch of French heritage, which makes for as exotic a wine as I think we've had on Dan Really Likes Wine. So there's another reason I'm very keen to try this wine. When I was in Chile, it was, for amongst other things, the wedding of Liz, a South African, and Felipe, a very well-known Chilean businessman. And Liz got a hold of me about 3-4 months ago to tell me that Julio Bouchon, this Chilean, who she knew was going to be over, did I have time to meet him? Could we possibly get the wine onto the show? Sadly, our paths didn't cross, but if Liz and Felipe are talking up a wine, it must be good because they drink a fair amount of it and they do know their stuff. And so it was their recommendation that I get hold of it. I've managed to, and so this is the first of the Longavi wines that I'm ever trying. I've got to be honest, I'm not sure on a blind tasting I'd have automatically picked that as a Sauvignon Blanc. There's a real richness to this wine. It's an incredibly full Sauvignon Blanc, not the style we might be more used to here in South Africa. There's a depth to it, and yeah, richness is the word. It's a really powerful mouthful of wine, a very strong, cool climate Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. I had a little Sauvignon Blanc when I was there. We mostly drank red wine with large chunks of Chilean red meat, which a lot of the Chileans do, but clearly they're fairly adept at making the whites as well. You see a lot of Chilean wine around the world, especially in Europe, and it's usually at the bottom end of the price range, when in fact a lot of it deserves to be a lot further up. Chile and South Africa have a similar problem. We've marketed our wine overseas at the bottom end, which makes it a lot harder to convince people that it's actually worth a lot more when we're sending over the better stuff. We can identify with that problem. We can also identify with great wine, and in the case here of a South African and a Chilean coming together, they've certainly put the best of their combined knowledge to very good use. So that Sauvignon Blanc from Longavi came in no small part thanks to the recommendation from my friends Liz and Felipe in Chile. This wine is a recommendation from a Greek, and he's a good friend of mine. He's a very good friend of my father-in-law, who's also Greek. This was given to me, along with the red that we'll try shortly, by Trifona. And Trifona is my father-in-law's closest friend here in South Africa. We see a lot of him. And just before Christmas, he came around with a case of wine and gave it to me with a smile on his face and asked me if I'd come across it. And I had to be honest, I'd never heard of Onoma. I knew the word, it means reputation. I study Greek along with my small children, so we can try and match up with my wife's Greek ability. So I knew the word, but I certainly didn't know the wine. What I did know, though, was that in 2017, Greek wine was top of my list for cool new discoveries. I spent quite a bit of time in Greece, and during that time, as well as wandering around beaches and eating far too much great Greek food, I had a fair amount of wine. Kefalonia was most impressive, some terrific vineyards, some really good wine, and also drank some wonderful wine from the Yiannakis brothers, who are making some very blue-collar fare, but great fare in the area of Mavromati in Greece. So the chance to try some Greek wine made in South Africa was one I leapt at. This is being made in the Stellenbosch Hills area. The Yiannakis family, they're from islands in the Aegean, and this is what they brought to South Africa. A red we'll try in a sec, but first up, their private cellar Chardonnay. And when you're trying wine in a different country, and Greece is a terrific example, you'll often find that the grapes are either very different or sometimes they just have different names and you don't realise. And when you explore wine in Greece, there are loads of grapes you just have not heard of coming from South Africa. A Chardonnay we certainly have heard of. When I think of the white wines I've had in Greece, very arid climate on a lot of the islands, on the Mediterranean, there's a lot of quite intense white wine that I found has been really, really good. And so I'd expect something similar if the Greek heritage is being passed on via this Chardonnay from the Yiannakis family. If you ever spent any time with Greeks, you'll know that they're incredibly loud and they make a big statement, and this certainly does on the nose. It's a big, loud nose, very bold, and yet leads to a wine that's perhaps a little more refined and subtle than you might expect from such a powerful first encounter. It is very refined, there's a lovely structure to it, and it's quite delicate for a Chardonnay. I think we're now past those days of being hit in the mouth by a branch when you try and drink Chardonnay. The wood generally in South African Chardonnay is a lot more understated, and this has been crafted delightfully. And if I close my eyes, I can just picture myself sitting back in Kefalonia, sitting in a beach in Kalamata, or back in Mavromati in my wife's family village, glass in hand, soaking up some Greek sunshine and enjoying something very similar to this. From the whites to the reds, and the palate's actually feeling very clean after that. It's one of those wines, that last Chardonnay, that doesn't linger too long. Very quick departure, which leaves me raring to go for the second of the Chileans. And this is more in line with what I drank a lot of in Chile. The first day I was in Santiago, my wife and I went to a restaurant which may or may not have been called the Patagonian Terrace, something along those lines, I think. And I ordered a meat platter, and it was a carnival's dream. It was a large cheese board just piled high with lumps of steak, bits of sausage, there was some venison. It was absolutely fantastic. Throw in the red wine and it's a heart attack in a meal, but a very, very enjoyable one. And needless to say, it went down with plenty of big, bold red wine from Chile. And again, some of the red wine I've had from Chile in Europe, when it hasn't come from the top end of the spectrum, hasn't really done the country justice, whereas the wine that's a little better made, and I'd expect something made by Julio Bouchon would fit into that particular grouping, is wine that really has been superb. This is the Longavi Cabernet Sauvignon. Again, it's made in the same area, it's made by the same people, David Niewoudt, combining expertise for a second assault from Chile and South Africa together. If you have a close look at the label, you'll see South Africa and Chile. In the actual logo, there's the condor soaring over the Andes, and then that wreath, that South African symbol, the Ourobos, which is symbolic of the circle of life and of nature. And then you'll also see the signature of the two guys, Julio in Spanish and David Niewoudt, his South African counterpart, putting together the Longavi Cabernet Sauvignon. We often talk about sportsmen who are born in South Africa and play for England, and when they do well they're South African, when they don't they're English. This is the kind of wine where we could say, well, if it's not so good it's Chilean, and if it is very good it's South African, in which case this is most definitely South African, because this is lovely. It's got a really big feel to it. It's a nice robust red, and it reminds me very clearly of whatever it was that we drank at the restaurant that may or may not have been called the Patagonian Terrace a number of years ago. This is a terrific combination. Chile's known for a number of things. Their football team's done really well in recent years. They're good at rescuing miners stuck underground with a bit of South African assistance, and they've had a bit of South African assistance here with this wine. David Niewoudt, Julio Bouchon, you've both done great things individually, but I think together you've put in a fabulous piece of winemaking teamwork. And so to our final one, and the second one from Greece. And red wine is not something you might naturally associated with Greece. A lot of white in Greece, a lot of rosé. The Kouvelakis brothers, the twins, Yanni and Vasily, make some delightful rosé with a real depth and none of the sweetness that sometimes kills it. But red wine, I hadn't seen a huge amount of on my earlier forays into Greece, but in more recent times I found a bit more of it, and I had some brilliant red on an Aegean flight into Athens last year, and so I made a point when I was in Greece of looking for some more Greek red wine, and just as the quality of their white and rosé has lifted, so the red has as well. And I was genuinely impressed by what the Greek wine industry was producing last year. So the question then is, are they able to take the reputation of Greek wine as it is at the moment in Greece, Onoma, as I said earlier, meaning reputation, and transfer it to a little Greek corner of Stellenbosch? Do that one again. Let's top it up there. It's very different. Okay. Now, the moment you pick up the nose on that, it's sharper, it's more tannic. You know you're getting a very different wine to the wine before. The previous wine is shouting from the rooftops. This is a lot more reserved. The palate a lot narrower. Very classic Cabernet Sauvignon style. It's probably got a little bit of time to open up a little more, but it's got a... It's probably got a bit of time to open up a little more, but it does have a delightful structure. But it does remind me, just as the previous wine did, of time spent in Chile. So this throws back to time spent in Greece and that drier red wine that you get a lot of, and unsurprisingly given the part of the world that you're in. What I really like though is the fact that a Greek family have taken, particularly with the red wine that is reminiscent of the wine that I've drunk in Greece, and produced it in Stellenbosch, but still in what is a very identifiably Cabernet Sauvignon style, and a super selection. All very enjoyable in very different ways. A rich Sauvignon Blanc that's not nearly as acidic as you might expect a Sauvignon Blanc to be. A Chardonnay that's a lot more subdued and reserved than ones we're perhaps accustomed to, and certainly more subdued and reserved than most of the Greeks are. A Cabernet Sauvignon that cries out for a big lump of meat on a beautiful day at a lovely restaurant in Santiago. And then this, the Onoma Cabernet Sauvignon, which is a lovely example of the style. What I like best though is that in both cases it's South Africa coming together with a completely different part of the world, and through the medium of wine uniting two very distant countries. Try these wines out. All four of them are excellent. That Longavi Cabernet Sauvignon in particular is exquisite, but it's the story behind them and a reminder of the unifying ability of wine that I think is the real reason for giving all of these a go. Cheers.